It's part of the culture telling us that we're not allowed to. It's part of the culture telling us, that we feel humiliated. That's the thing about surfing is that when you're out in the lineup, like everybody knows you're the kook. I mean, there is just no way around it. And what I have found is that I had to get over, surfing is the coolest sport in the world if you're good at it. The thing, I mean, there's nothing less cool than a not good surfer. And that's me. That would be me. Yeah. Doesn't mean I can't surf. I do surf. When people see me catch waves, they're always completely shocked because they're like, "Oh my God, you do surf." I'm like, "Yeah, I can surf. It's hard for me, but I can once I, paddle into catch and, catch a wave. I can catch sections and have a nice ride and blah, blah, blah." They're like, "Oh, you could." I was like, "Yeah, I can do this." But so much of it is not pretty. But what I have found is that what was beautiful is when I let go of that idea of, okay, I have to let go of the way I'm afraid people or what they're thinking about me, right? Because actually people aren't really thinking about you because they just out themselves and what they, people are thinking about their own waves. They just don't want you in the way. But I think this is a metaphor for everything else. It's like, not only do people not judge you if you aren't judging yourself, right?
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
People can do amazing things, walk on the moon, contain a nuclear meltdown. And what do they have in common? They're not in it alone.
Creativity, talent, genius, it's all a team sport.
We have seen what we thought was unseeable.
It was a step in a direction that nobody had taken before.
I'm Gabriella Cowperthwaite, host of Teamistry. It's an original podcast from Atlassian, all about the chemistry of teams. Check it out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen.
Karen, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Jane. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I found out about your book, as I often do, from another book written by one of our upcoming podcast guests and former podcast guest, Jennifer Loudon. And it was a book called It's Great to Suck at Something, which I think that just hearing that, people are probably going to be like, no, it's not. But the funny thing about it was, I think Jen had some quote in there, and I ordered it specifically because of that quote. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that the entire basis for the book was surfing as the metaphor. And having done...
You didn't know that before you got it.
I didn't. I had no idea.
Wow. That's...
So right when I opened it, I thought to myself, oh my God, I was like, we have to talk. Like, there's no way I'm not going to email you and wanting to talk to you about this. But before we get into the concepts of the book, I want to ask you what I think is a really relevant and fitting place to start. And that is, what is one of the most important things that one or both of your parents taught you about values, or about sucking in particular, that have influenced and shaped who you've become and what you've ended up doing with your life?
Oh, wow. That's an amazing first question to ask. Did they teach me anything in this way? I think I would say that my dad, my father, with whom I'm very, very close, he was an athlete, and he was a very good athlete. And I was basically a good athlete as well, kind of naturally. But there were certain things that I couldn't do very easily, and it was funny. I couldn't throw a ball. I could never throw a ball. He used to just think it was the most hilarious thing that I was so strong and capable. But it's like throwing a ball, just like it eluded me. And when I wanted to be in high school, I was the unlikely athlete of being both a cheerleader and a shot putter. and it was an odd combination. And the shot putting weirdly came, even though I couldn't throw a ball, I could put, the shot. And I was actually I was really good at it. But cheerleading just didn't come natural to me. And I sort of loved the yin yang of those two kind of, those two disciplines. Mm-hmm. And people had grown up doing cheerleading and I hadn't. And so I would go in the front. I would just go into the front of the house and he would help me jump. He was very strong. So I would try to do these jumps and I just couldn't figure it out. I literally just had to do it on my own. I would just jump and jump and jump. And he always he was just there helping me through it. He didn't discourage me. He didn't say, you can't do this. When it came to the physical stuff, he was actually very supportive, and just, you push through, you train, you learn how to do it. And so there was very much a can-do attitude about it when it came to the life of the body. It was very different with the life of the mind, but that's another conversation.
So there are two things that come from this. One, this is something I wondered, and just because you mentioned you were really close to your dad, I realize looking at the relationship that I have with my dad and my sister has with my dad, I think they're two fundamentally different relationships. And for a long time, I used to kind of envy that and think, I'm not going to have that. Maybe I'm not as interesting or cool. Like the ongoing joke is that, my sister calls his ear, you just hear the change in his tone of voice, like when she walks in a room. But what I realized was that was nothing to do with the bond that I have between me and him. I realized that is just a father and daughter thing. And I wonder, as somebody who just mentioned you're close to your father, what do you think that's about? Like, why is that? And you have sons. So is it, how does that play out?
Yeah, no, I do. You know what? I think, I know just as many people who are close to their, closer to their moms, like where their moms are their best friends. And they don't have good relationships with their dads. I would hate to kind of make a generalization about fathers and daughters, and mothers and sons, because I think it would kind of not count into relationships between mothers and daughters and fathers and sons.
Right.
I don't know if it's in our case. Interestingly, I think it was less about me being his daughter than it was about me being, of his three children, most like him. Interestingly, so I share a lot of his qualities and still do. I mean, he's 89. He's just a beautiful, wonderful 89-year-old man. But and we're still very close. But I think we shared a lot in the sense that, from a character point of view, we recognized each other. By the way, there were enormous fights. I mean, I can't say that it wasn't all songs and sunshine. There were huge fights that we had, partly because we would just go head to head, and I would take him on, and and then in his softer moments he'd be like, yeah, you remind me of me, because he was headstrong when he was young. And then I have relationships with my sons, which are very, very, I feel very blessed, because they're extraordinary relationships, and I feel blessed every day by them.
Wow.
By their grace in my life, really. I mean, I just feel graced by them. But I think that, maybe that love, it maybe funnels down in a way. Like you learn maybe how to love, through one of your parents, and my mom, it's a different story.
Yeah.
I have two stepdaughters I love, as well. So I'm really close to them. So again, I don't know how much of it is gender related as it is, having an open heart, and wherever that open heart happens, that's where the relationships happen. If you have two open hearts, I think that's where the connection gets made. I'm not to say that you and your dad didn't have that.
Yeah.
Who knows? Like there could have been, I don't know. I can't even speculate about your family. I don't know your family. But.
Yeah. I think that to me, I think what I've come to see is that it's love that it's expressed in really different ways. So like, I think that one of the things I learned from 6 months of therapy was that my primary love languages are words of affection and physical affection, words of affirmation and physical affection, two things that most Indian parents just don't do, because it's just culturally not part of the way we operate. Like the first time I saw my parents kiss, I was like, holy shit, that was awkward. And it was probably well into my 30s. It was just like, oh, wow. I didn't know you guys ever did that, at least not in our presence. But then, he'll do things that out of the blue, he's like, hey, I want the air to be clean in your apartment. I shipped 2 air filters for you and your roommate from Costco. They'll be there on Thursday. And so what we started to realize,
that is love.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just, or I sent 3 pairs of pajamas to you. It's like, what am I going to do with 3 pairs of pajamas and why? He's like, oh, they were on sale at Costco. And that to me, I realized was, okay, this is, an expression of love. It just may not be expressed in the way that I want it to be, which was one of my most profound realizations about the relationship I have with him. So I think that what I wonder about sort of how you arrive at this whole idea of it's great to suck at something in the career that you've had is what advice did your family give you career-wise? Like, what led you down this trajectory? Because I think that particularly for somebody like me, this was very much unplanned. I mean, you are a publisher, you're a writer, you've been in this world for a long time. And one of the things that we all know is that we're signing up for a life in which nothing is guaranteed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know that anything anywhere is guaranteed. Yeah. It doesn't have it might have a less of a safety net in some ways. Well, it's the opposite. I didn't get encouragement. I got discouragement. My father was actually very pessimistic about my prospects in publishing. I had followed in his footsteps, and my first job out of college was at, this is crazy, but it was at Price Waterhouse, and I was a tax consultant for foreign nationals and working in the United States. I mean, you can't make this up. And I have a pretty good facility with numbers, and they don't scare me at all. And I wound up being very good at it. I hated it. I just hated it. But it was, he was very proud. And, I think his first job might have even been at Price Waterhouse when he was, a young man. And so when I decided to quit and pursue, well, first I was going to grad school, then I dropped out of grad school, then I got into publishing. So my path was zigzag to say, at best. So I didn't get encouragement. I got the opposite. But, I also love nothing better than a no. I've been like that since I've been a kid. It's like, if you just tell me no, I just kind of double down on the yes. And that's part of why probably I could persist in, surfing when it was so hard for me. Yeah. But so when he said, no, it's not for people like you. And I thought, well, what does that mean? And so I said, well, I'll show you, and I got into it. And many years later, like 20 years later, we're sitting in my backyard, at this house where I'm sitting now in New Jersey. He lives in New Jersey as well. And he said, I never understood that there was a path to success in the world that you're in. And I said, well, yeah, it's relative success, Dad, but it's something I love doing and I've devoted my life to it. So that is the measure of success. And I've been able to support my family doing it as well. So we live nicely, absolutely nicely. And I've, stuck with it for the past 30 something years. Yeah. So it wasn't forged. It wasn't a path forged. I didn't go to when I got into publishing, I didn't go to the right schools. I don't have the right education. I'm a New Jersey public school educated Italian American who went to Ohio State and had an unfocused college career and was kind of lost. The only thing that persisted from when I was very young, and I don't know where this comes from. This is just divinely gifted, I think, from some other place, is that I love literature. I love books. I love literature. I loved them when I was young. I grew up in a household with no books. My family didn't read. My mother only graduated high school. My father went to night school. I mean, we were not, was not a super educated family, extended or immediate. And I found my way to books because they spoke to me and I loved them. And then once I discovered a library that I could just get on my bike and go to the library, it was like a playland for me. And where does that come from? I don't even know. I always knew that the world was really big out there. And, if you live in a tiny, little tiny town with a relatively clustered, cloistered and clustered group of, Italian Americans, family and extended family. And I was like, oh, but there's this world out there, and the way for me to access it, because we didn't access it in the way we lived, but I could access it through books. And I felt that very young. And I would get, books still to this day. they get me. That's all I read. My friends always say, if you're not working or editing or publishing or reading or writing, you're reading. Like that's what I do. And then I surf and I cook. My life is pretty well. It's like I surf.
Well,
priority. I will, if I could surf, I would surf first before I do anything. Yeah. Except, as it's hard to do, right? Because got to be swell. There's got to be, everything's got to be working. If it's working, I just go, yeah, I'm going to go surf. And I have a job in New York City, so that doesn't all work out. But, I travel to do it, and I make time for it. And I love to cook, and that's my way of centering and relaxing.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, I'm reading, writing, publishing, editing. That's all I do. It's like I live in books, and I still get as excited to open up a new book as I did when I was 11 years old.
Wow.
So I think that just comes, you kind of wonder where it comes from. There was no influence really, except that once I found them, I thought, these are, I still love to hold them. I remember Dr. Seuss books when I was a little kid were like, I still look at Dr. Seuss books with so much love in my heart, because when I was there, I think they're the first books I registered reading and holding and loving. And I was probably 5, 6 years old.
Wow. It's, it's funny to listen to you express this. It's almost like you might have been my other mother in another life, just because I feel like you and I are so similar in so many ways. Like I jokingly always say I'm the redheaded stepchild of Penguin Portfolio. Like these are all people who are like Seth Godin, Simon Sinek, and then here's the guy who got fired from every job and, got a 2.97 GPA at Berkeley. It's like, this was just a giant fluke or a mistake.
Yeah.
But I think this love of books is really fascinating to me, because I relate so much. I remember when we got The Great Gatsby, and then right after that, I picked up This Side of Paradise. And I remember I would walk into a bookstore on the Santa Monica Promenade that's obviously no longer there, and they would have these floor to ceiling bookshelves. And I thought to myself, like, I don't know how or why, but I can spend hours in here.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that now, literally, when I land in a city, the first thing I do is go and look for a bookstore that I haven't been to. And I remember the day I got paid for my previous book, my friend's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm going to go to the bookstore and buy your book, buy some books." He's like, wait a minute. What? He's like, "You just got paid for writing your book and you're going to spend it all on books?" It's like, yeah, that seems like the most logical thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we are over. Rocco was just laughing because he was at Amherst College, and then his senior year, and he had to leave. But we were in the apartment, and he said, "This is ridiculous. Every single surface." And we live in Manhattan, so we don't have that much space. And it's like every surface is piled with books. And I was like, I don't even know what to do with it. I said, it makes me just want to move. Like, I don't know what to do with them, because the last time we moved into the apartment, but it was 18 years ago. We got rid of, we culled our books. Because we don't have a library. We don't have space. Yeah. So we cull, and I kept just the most important books, figuring I can just buy the books that I need to read later on. And we culled like, between my husband and I, culled like 3,000 books. And I said, and now we probably have, I don't know how many thousands we have in the house. And it's got the boys, their room, because they grew up reading books. So it's all their books. It's my books that I've accumulated 18 years, and Joel's books. It's just so crazy. And I just think, I can't even imagine living a life without them. Like they're so intimate. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing about books, right? Like when you read, The Great Gatsby just is mind blowing, because it's actually, I think it's a perfectly executed book. But yeah, they're like friends. They're intimates, and you can go to them. And anyway, yeah, I do.
Yeah. So what this makes me wonder is that, and I've asked this question in some form or another to hundreds of people at this point. Like, why do some people never find that? Like, whatever this thing is, maybe it's not. What is their version? Sometimes people they lose their version of this at some point in their life. Why is that, and how do they get it back?
Do you know what I think a couple of things about this, and I think some people just say I don't like to read. Here's what I think. I think people have people don't read the right books when they're young, that don't speak to them, and then they go to school and they're forced to read books that they don't relate to, right? That have nothing to do with their experience, and therefore they feel like books are something that's I've never read something that, appeals to, there's a book for everyone, but, finding that, I think is really important. So I think kids they don't find them. And then I think that when they do have to read, they're forced to read. I do think that reading, I used to do with my kids when I was, making them, like, they needed to go to bed or they weren't listening to me or something. I said, you know what? No books tonight. That's their punishment, was no books. So I'd say, we're not reading tonight. We're not reading. You can't read tonight. They'd be like, no. And I'm like, no, you can't read. You guys are not listening to me. You're not. You know what parents often do? get to your room and read.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it becomes a punishment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, to a young brain, if you're using books as punishment, then all of a sudden it becomes this thing that you were, again, forced to do that you were doing when you weren't behaving. So I think those two things. And I think third thing is that I believe that a lot of kids have challenges, and reading, like a lot of people who don't like reading actually have challenges from a kind of either a disability, like a kind of dyslexia, or an attention problem, or a deciphering problem. I do think that there are a lot of, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't say this with certainty, just that I know a lot of in my immediate family, if I look at the readers, the ones who aren't readers are people who struggled because their struggle with reading wasn't acknowledged and worked around when they were younger. So they grew up to think it's hard, it's hard work. When in fact, if they were able to overcome it, they might have a workaround with reading, or they might, I think audiobooks, the advent of audiobooks has been, really, the popularity of them recently has been really great for people who struggle with reading, because it is reading. Listening to a book is reading. They're all different ways of reading.
So we know a lot of you have been listening to us for years, and it means the world to us. What we do here at the Unmistakable Creative wouldn't be possible without the support of our listeners. If the podcast has been valuable to you, one of the best ways you can support us is to subscribe to Unmistakable Creative Prime, which gives you access to transcripts, all of our courses, monthly coaching calls, live chats with our guests, and an incredible community of creatives. And it costs less than you spend on a cup of coffee every month. For the school teachers and people in our education system, Prime is completely free to help you with this transition to teaching online. We've packed it with a ton of value and actionable content, and we hope you'll check it out. Just go to unmistakablecreative.com/prime to learn more. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/prime. So, I wonder, we specifically talked about the love for reading, but I think that to me, one of the other things that's really interesting about your life and your career is that you just have this love for this thing that you do. And I think somewhere along the way, as adults, we kind of lose hope that maybe that just doesn't exist in our life. Like, we're not going to have this career that is so rewarding and fulfilling. I mean, for somebody who has this love for books, it's kind of like you basically get to, bathe in clouds all day because of your job. And you know what I mean? I'm being, for the sake of example, look, we both know that there's a very ugly side to all of this as well, having been in the industry. But I think that, one thing that I find is that we sort of lose this sort of childhood dream in adulthood idea. And I wonder, do you think people can get it back at later in life? I mean, because I think that I'm one of those rare examples of, okay, I found this calling of wanting to write, like I was 37 when I published my first book. Up until then, it was just like, I'm just a giant fuck up who's 40 years behind my life plan.
Yeah, that thing that people do, which is to judge like where they're at and, compared to other people. So remember, where you're at is where you are, but the only time that, you attach a value to it is when you compare it to somebody else's life who's either making more money or further in their career, or who found their thing. And I think a lot of it, is that not accepting sort of where you are. I mean, I see this all the time. I see it with kids a lot, and not that everybody can follow their bliss. I mean, that's a privilege. This is a privileged person talking, right? Because I was able to do that on one hand, but privilege meaning, we had no money. I mean, I had no direction, and I had to stumble into a lot of things before I fell into books, and I didn't get into, I always loved literature, but it actually felt out of reach for me, because I felt like a working class, girl from New Jersey doesn't have the right to enter the kind of world of letters and books and literature, which is bullshit, of course. I mean, that's ridiculous. But it felt defeat to me, and it felt out of my reach. And I had a job where I was doing really, really well, and I literally quit. Took a half cut in pay to become an editorial assistant at Random House. And I can go through the machinations of how I stumbled into that. But, I took a chance where I was, financially in a really good place as a young professional, and said, I'm just not happy. And it's like, well, what do you love? I was asking, what do I love? It's like, I just love to read. And then I was like, well, somebody said, why not work in publishing? I said, they don't hire people like me in publishing. I didn't have the right pedigree. I didn't have the right education. I didn't have the right experience. And you know what? I was just dogged about it, and it took me a while, but I finally landed a job and went out. But at that point, I was 28 years old. I mean, I'd been out and about a little bit, so I didn't even find it. When I landed it was at Random House, and I landed there, and I thought, oh, I'm home. I'm home. But you know what? I left it. I also walked out 4.5 years later because I thought you don't make any money in publishing, and you work basically 60-hour weeks on a good week. Why am I doing this? And so I thought, this is ridiculous. And you get disillusioned just like everybody else. And I think, I thought it was just about reading, and it's not. It's about this and that. So I had to leave and, for 3 years and come back to it. The road was not like all love and sunshine. Even when I found it, I struggled with it because it's a grind. I have a friend who's a banker, and she's like, she makes a lot more money than I do. She goes, you work harder than I've, which she's not a banker, she's an analyst, but she does really well. And she's like, you work so hard. It's so insane. I was like, yeah, but I get to spend my days with authors and writers and creatives and stuff. And I don't think I could I couldn't spend it with bankers or former bankers. I mean, I couldn't, and not that they're bad people. I mean, I love, some of my friends are bankers and I love them and we need them, but that's just not where I want to spend my day, because I wanted to be able to have conversations that I wanted to have. The conversations are good. Yeah. But, the price for finding the thing that you love and sticking with it, and, so I quit after 4.5 years, and then I almost quit again after another few years. I left, I came back after 3, and then I almost quit again. And because I said to somebody, I was like, I can't keep doing this. I'm barely able to support myself. And somebody gave me advice and just said, just stick with it. Like, you've got to stick. And that is you're going to be okay. You're never going to get rich, but you're going to do fine if you and I was like, okay. But it took me like 15 years to make a living where I could actually support my family, without being terrified.
Yeah.
So,
I'm that means I'm actually on track. I'm about 10 years in. So
there you go. I mean, so following the thing that you love, the problem is that, it's often not the thing that's going to make you the most money, give you the most prestige, or people don't, people in the book world, we all love it, but, outside of the book world, people don't really know what we do.
I always think people always think that just books fall from the sky. They don't realize that somebody sits in a room quietly, laboring over this for years.
And that's the beginning of it, right? The laboring over for years, which we've both done. And then there's the process of publishing, which is like another year or two.
That's a whole beast in and of itself.
For any book to land in any bookstore, which actually is not happening right now, but that's another story. But for them to land in any bookstore always seems like a miracle to me. And that's okay. I mean, people don't need to see the underside of it, because that's true of any, endeavor.
Yeah, I think that to me, that makes a perfect segue into getting into your book. It's great to suck at something. Like I said, I think to me, right when we started this, I opened it up and I was like, holy shit, wait a minute, this is a book about surfing. And I think, obviously I highlighted and underlined tons of this, but one of the things you said is that quitting before we start is the tragedy. The other side of frustration and discouragement is tenacity and hope. Let's live in the doing. The process itself is where we should find satisfaction. Success is a reward we should not come to expect. Once success is attained, if ever, we should be humbled by it. And the reason I wanted to start there is because I think that is particularly relevant in the world that we live in today, in the wake of a college admissions scandal, in the wake of, how people go to social media. I think that, particularly because you've been around this world for so long, I think that for me, I realized that when I started, my expectations were, I can go from idea to execution in record time, so I should be able to succeed just as quickly. Of course, anybody who has, as you said, been willing to stick, realizes that, wait a minute, I can go from idea to execution in record time. To make any semblance of success at the idea is going to take way longer than I thought. And yet I think we're losing that sense of patience and this love for the process. And you, having sort of, seen both sides of this, you were there when we didn't have all this stuff in play, like the internet. So how do you think about that now?
Well, which part of it? About process?
I guess, about process and the do you see impatience in young creators? And then and what you say to them in these moments. And, even the people who get book deals, they go, like, I know this. I was firsthand thinking, I was like, oh, you get one, like the book deal is like this huge accomplishment. And the moment the book comes out, the deal no longer matters. It's like, who gives a shit? Everybody gets book deals. And you don't realize the value of that. You no longer value it. And you're like, wait a minute. It's like, well, Ryan Holiday sold 300,000 books. We're at the same imprint. I'm a failure.
Yeah, well, to somebody who can't get their book published, you're a great success, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder, kind of how you think about this as somebody who is in the position that you're in and having seen this world prior to social media and, what it looks like now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks like now. That's the other thing. I feel like people are people. And I know that we change and technology change. The Industrial Revolution changed us, and the technological, revolution changed us and all of that. So, our attention spans are getting shorter, and there are studies to this effect and all of that. I do think that people want meaning, and I feel like, there's definitely I feel like there must be a corollary from other centuries, right? That's what I'm saying. It's like, I think social media means that people think, hey, I'll just start an Instagram account and then I'll be up to like 500,000 followers. And, if I just post every day, and people, the people who are really successful on say Instagram, I don't do Twitter. So I have an IG account that I have for fun, but, people don't understand how much time even that takes, right? So do I think that people want, they expect, to get the gold star, the promotion, I think that they've been, sold a bunch of crap by, the way the world looks pretty on social media. But I mean, this goes back to advertising. If you go look at advertising from the, the 50s, that was the promise of advertising, right? Buy this thing and buy this car and you'll be happy, buy this makeup and you'll be beautiful and your husband will love you more, or whatever the promise is. There are always these shortcuts. And I think that, we're sold a bunch of crap with those shortcuts, but that really speaks of kind of a spiritual absence and grounding in some way. And that everything is hard. Everything takes a long time. If you talk to anyone at all who's been through process, but for some reason, we always want to think it's easier for other people, that they didn't have to go through the trials. And I it's like I wrote the book and I feel like I touched the surface of this. And then since the book, I've been thinking much more deeply about it.
Yeah.
And trying to really understand why people think that everybody else has it better, easier, quicker, and that they're comparing, they're looking over their shoulder as opposed to just saying, where am I right now? Mm-hmm. I get a question all the time that you'll probably appreciate. But being a writer and a publisher, when I speak to groups of people about any of this, whether it's Suck at Something or, write the writing process or anything I'm speaking about, I'll always, every single crowd, somebody will raise their hand and say, how do I get published? And I'll say, wrong question. Ask me another question. And they kind of look at me puzzled. And I'll say, ask me another question. Getting published is not the point. It's really about, how do I, develop my writing skills or my storytelling skills, and do you have advice about, what your process is? It's only process. I said, because, and this, right? You write, the fun part is writing the book, and publishing is great. I mean, I do it every day for my authors, and I published a couple of books myself, but that is not the most rewarding part. The rewarding part is the process of doing the writing, which takes years usually, of thinking and executing. Yeah. And then it's also connecting with another reader, right? So a reader reads you, and then you make that connection because that's what a book is, right? It reaches out to people. I would never have this conversation with you if you didn't hear about my book and say, oh, we have a lot in common. Then all of a sudden we get to make a connection. That to me is what it's about. The getting published part is like, that's the signal, the kind of external signal that you are validated, that you are worthy. And it will never make you happy. right? That just, it just doesn't happen that way. The process can be fulfilling, and the connection, I think, is really, really, truly important. And yes, you might have to get published to make that connection, but there are other ways to make connections as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny. My self-published books, so like the one I had, that kind of put me on the map, outsold both of my traditionally published books. So that
there
was
you go.
one component of it. But I think that you made a really interesting point about sort of the process. It's funny. People would ask me, like, how does it feel to be done? And I said, to be honest, now I'm depressed. This thing that has been my like huge source of meaning for 2 years now is gone. Like it's disorienting to not have this thing that you're working on. But I think that this actually makes a perfect segue to sort of how you basically give us an invitation to suck. And this was something that struck me because I think both of us as surfers know this. It doesn't matter how bad a first time was. A key component to sucking at something is acceptance that first times are overrated. This is true even for what comes naturally. Now, I don't know anybody who went to a first surf lesson and was like, holy shit, that was amazing. I always tell my friends, I was like, learning to surf sucks. Surfing is amazing. And so, but the thing is, I wonder, why we don't embrace this more. What role does our education system play in people, not being okay with sucking? Because so many people, they might have a bad first experience with something and say, oh yeah, I could tell you from my first surfing experience, I was the most unlikely person to become a surfer between being, Indian and not genetically predisposed for anything athletic. And, the fact that I just was a total kook, none of my friends thought when we were living in Brazil that I would be the one that, ended up surfing for the next 10 years. And I wonder, why is it that people lose that sort of drive, they suck at something once and then that seems to get even worse as adults to the point where they won't even try something new.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, that's one of the conversations I've had more than any others with adults is that, I haven't tried something new in a really long time. And people, were addicted to goal setting, reward getting, validation. We become addicted to that stuff, really. And when we try something and we find we're not good at it, it kind of turns up the volume on the critic in our head, right? And it says that you are no good, that you suck. That it's interesting. Being great to suck at something is really meant to be an act of self-love. When at first it seems like, why would I say that I suck at something? So it's counterintuitive in that way. My point is that as soon as you try something and you fail at it, but say you had fun. I mean, I always think of musical instruments are one of those things that are incredibly satisfying when you get it right, but it takes a long time to learn. And, being afraid of, carrying the shame around not being innately talented, we seem to falsely believe in a kind of innate talent as opposed to the hard work that actually is necessary. Like very few of us are, preternaturally sort of predisposed to be a genius at one thing. Sometimes those things, frankly, the things that come easily, I don't find actually the most pleasure in that. I find more pleasure in the things that are actually quite difficult. And then you find the tenacity and the resilience to sort of overcome the obstacles, and then you get it done. You think, wow, I just got through that. But I do think that we're I think there's a lot, the whole book in a way is about that, about our resistance to sucking at something. But I think it's part of the culture telling us that we're not allowed to. It's part of the culture telling us, that we feel humiliated. That's the thing about surfing is that when you're out in the lineup, like everybody knows you're the kook. I mean, there is just no way around it. And what I have found is that I had to get over, surfing is the coolest sport in the world if you're good at it. It is the thing. I mean, you can't be less cool than, there's nothing less cool than a not good surfer. and that's me. That would be me. Doesn't mean I can't surf. I do surf. When people see me catch waves, they're always completely shocked because they're like, oh my God, you do surf. I'm like, yeah, I can surf. It's hard for me, but I can, once I, paddle into, catch a wave, I can catch sections and have a nice ride and blah, blah, blah. They're like, oh, you could, I was like, yeah, I can do this. But, so much of it is not pretty. But what I have found is that what was beautiful is when I let go of that idea of, okay, I have to let go of the way I'm afraid people or what they're thinking about me, right? Because actually people aren't really thinking about you because they just out themselves and what they people are thinking about their own waves. They just don't want you in the way. But I think this is a metaphor for everything else. It's like, not only do people not judge you if you aren't judging yourself, right?
Yeah.
Judging yourself is really where it all starts. So if you let go of that, right, and you say, I'm just not going to judge myself in this. I'm just going to do it because I'm out on the board and I'm out in the lineup and I'm really happy and I'm going to be safe and I'm going to be respectful and do all the right things I need to do in the lineup, but I am going to try. What happens is that everyone around you, and this happens more times than it doesn't. Every once in a while, somebody's a jerk, but that's that person's problem. Most people are so incredibly generous, and what they want to do is they want to help you. So in being out in public and not being an expert in something and being okay with that, not being clueless and arrogant and ignorant, because those things are dangerous. Being cognizant that I am not in full control, that I am not the best surfer out there, that I need help, that I will be careful, blah, blah, blah. What happens is that people around me, I get people blocking for me, help me into waves, people giving me their waves. People are so kind. And I realize that kindness comes not from me being an expert. The kindness comes from me saying, I'm scared, or that wave might be too big for me, or should I, I'm afraid I don't have priority, should I go? But I think this applies anywhere. If you're like in the potting studio and you're throwing pottery, which is really hard to do, or making, people who are in that world, like, if you go in there and like you're embarrassed because you're like, oh, I can't do this. This is too hard. I look like an idiot, and then what happens is you don't even open up the opportunity to connect with someone else who can say, hey, let me help you. Do you know how good it feels to have someone who's, better than you at something, who's more knowledgeable, who says, let me help you? To me, it's one of the great gifts that goes in both directions. You allow people to help you, and you also are able to receive this kindness that this person gets to bestow, right, on you. And it's just this beautiful loop that if we aren't afraid to suck at something, if we become afraid to suck at something and we're afraid to try anything new or be a newbie or be less than good at it, who's going to ever step in and kind of help you? And I've learned that so much beauty comes out of that connection. This was a kind of knock-on effect that I didn't expect, and I kind of came to later. And I realized that the surfing community has been so kind to me, even though I started late and I struggle. And it's been, and it's an incredibly judgmental and difficult community, right? Like,
right.
It's a tough place. And by the way, I wouldn't get into a crowded lineup in Malibu, being a person who's goofy and can't go right, and then screw up everybody's line. Like I would feel like, right? Like it would be a problem. But that said, if I had a friend to paddle out with at Malibu and said, can you help me? Can you block for me? Can you help me call me into the wave and help me go backside? Blah, blah, I would do it, but I would do it in a respectful way. But the point is that it's like knowing your place, but also the communities, even the surfing community is actually incredibly generous and kind. And that's been a great thing. And the other thing is that, and this is really where this leads, is that when you allow yourself to try something, see, I think there are things that people always say, oh, I'd love to dance, but I wouldn't dance. I'm not a good dancer. Or I love to sing, or I love to play the guitar or the trumpet or the violin, but I'm not any good at it. And I'm like, yeah. So what? You're not making your living doing it. Like, so go do it. I've had so many people start new things. My sister's doing watercolors. A good friend of mine is dancing for the first time. Like, people are doing things they wouldn't normally do, and then they find the joy in it. And of course, guess what? You get better as you do.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think is the bonus from all of this is that the things we're good at, like I don't suck at everything. I suck at some things. Surfing is the thing that means the most to me that I suck at. I love surfing probably more than anything else that I do. Yeah. And the thing I am least good at, which doesn't make any sense, which is what got me thinking about the book, right? It's like, how can I get the most joy out of the thing that I am worst at? And I thought, well, partly is that there is so much freedom and not having to be good at it. Nobody needs me to surf well. You know what I mean? Like, unless the person who's, on my line and I can't avoid them because I'm staring right at them instead of staring at the wall, whatever. I do screwy things, but I mostly don't need to surf well. And there's freedom in that. So I can get out there and I don't have to perform. Nobody's counting on me to do that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that because I'm used to doing this thing that is very difficult and doing it anyway with great kind of perseverance and resilience and tenacity and all that other stuff, when I suck at things that I'm supposed to be good at, by the way, I do. When I suck at being a communicator or a publisher or a writer or a parent or all the things that I do that are really important to me, I find that it's a lot quicker for me to recover from that moment of suckiness, right? As opposed to beating myself up too much. I recover and then I can correct it. Doesn't mean you get a pass.
Right.
You do something up, things that are really important. You should basically fix it, but you don't have to go through that whole self-hatred. Oh God, I screwed up. Oh God, I'm worthless. Oh, all that bullshit kind of stuff that gets into your head that really doesn't help anybody get anywhere. And I really do think that practicing this discipline of surfing and not being good at it, but doing it anyway, has given me a lot more patience with myself and also made me a lot more quicker to fix the things that I screw up where it does matter.
Yeah.
And, and to admit it, because I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to kook out on that wave. I know what it feels like to put myself in danger. I know what it feels like, to just do something wrong. Not that there's so many ways to do that on a wave, but that I just take that lesson and then I apply it to the places where the stakes are high. And I found that people always say, oh, does sucking at something make you better at everything else? No, it only makes you better at sucking. I know that sounds crazy, but it makes you better at sucking even at the things you're good at, because you're always going to mess up in the things you're good at, no matter who you are. We all do it.
What would you do if you had to figure out how to photograph something in deep space that nobody knows is really there? This question and more get answered on Teamistry, the new podcast from Atlassian. Hosted by filmmaker Gabriella Cowperthwaite, Teamistry looks past the front page headlines and into the untold stories of teams behind groundbreaking moments. Each episode examines how the extraordinary chemistry of these teams made the impossible possible. Download Teamistry for free wherever you listen to podcasts and learn more at Atlassian.com/Teamistry.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's funny, people ask about the writing process, like, 90% of everything I read is absolute shit. Like nobody, you always are like, why would anybody pay me to write books? That was a terrible idea. But it's funny you even mentioned surfing, because I think that, I have had days after 10 years when I paddle out, I don't catch a single wave. I'm like, how could I be this bad at something I've done for so long? But I think that one of the other things you said, and this makes a really perfect segue to talk specifically about education, because I think you and I were talking about educators before we hit record. We have a lot of parents listening to this. You say if we create a habit of wanting only a certain outcome, we can get stuck on focusing on the result. It's a totally different mindset from learning. There are rewards associated with improvement, but learning is a process of gathering, not of sowing. Learning opens us up to the world. Now, the funny thing is, our education system is, ironically, despite the fact that its function is to basically, create learning, it's incredibly outcome focused. You get rewarded for good grades by acceptance to a prestigious college. If you do well at that college, you get your job at Google or Goldman Sachs.
Right.
So how do we have these two paradoxes coexist and yet give people, the permission to suck at the same time?
Well, I mean, I think that, that outcome, what you're talking about is like an outcome of what, Goldman Sachs or Google and going to an Ivy or a little Ivy, as opposed to going to, just getting an education and and following, doing things with great intention and following your heart. Because there are a lot of other of us who don't do that, who don't have those, the super high, golden key jobs, which, by the way, never guarantee anybody to be happy at all, not for 1 second. But I think that idea that our education system is set up, and I'm not an educator, so I don't even have an answer for this. I do know that the whole testing system and the standardized tests and stuff do not respect and do not make the most out of the ways in which kids can be so smart and, creative and brilliant. Like, I know a lot of kids who struggle in school, and these kids are just as smart as any other kid. It's just that they don't test well, or they don't, academically they're not performing, but there's not an outlet for them to be more creative or to thinking not linearly or not in that kind of standardized way. So it doesn't reflect the great spectrum of humans, and their ways in which they are, can tap into their creative, aspects and their talent, or, and any of those things. And I don't know what the answer is to, with funding cut from schools where you've cut theater and dance and art and music and all those things. I think that is just a great failure of the American education, where those are the first things to get cut, where, part of me would go like, forget all the other stuff, forget the, let's just teach them how to think and to be creative and to give them exposure to all this stuff to see where they will thrive. Yeah. So, I think it's just, it breaks my heart, the way that schools, do, and not all schools, but there is a great failure in the American public school education where, kids you have to fit down a line. And then, okay, so if you're not going to fit into that conventional pattern, you then need a support system at home that's going to help you work around that, right? And figure out, and not pathologize it. And I don't, you gotta, it's gotta be working somewhere. So if you don't get it in the schools, then you need to have it at home. And then I think, a lot of parents struggle with that. I also frankly think a lot of parents get really competitive and, with other parents and other kids and, and push their kids to, succeed conventionally, for their own messed up reasons. Everybody does that, but I think that that's really a disservice to kids. It doesn't help them learn at all. So, we have to watch, we have to put a check on our own, ambitions for our children and make sure that they're not about our egos and what we think is right, as opposed to just listening to what your kid needs and how your kid wants to learn and succeed. And for us not to put pressure, even if we don't put pressure on the grades, the culture's doing it. But if the culture's doing it and the parents are doing it, I don't think it guarantees any kind of happiness, fulfillment, or even success, frankly. I guess you can call me the opposite of a tiger mom in a way.
Which is probably why I wanted to talk to you, because, that's as somebody who grew up in an Indian family, we were very much in, like, failure was not encouraged. And that actually, I think, takes me to something else you said. You said that every time you see someone fail willingly in public, that person is loud and clearly and simultaneously telling you, you may just be missing it. I'm more than enough to account for this failure and other failures and anything else. My worth doesn't depend on it. Yes. You can say that too anytime you want. And that probably was my favorite quote from the entire book.
Oh, it's so good. Great. Oh, good.
And the reason that one, struck me in particular is because we don't celebrate public failure. It's not like you're putting the people who blew startups up on the cover of magazines. You're putting billionaires and, founders of unicorns on the covers of magazines. And yet the willingness to do what you said is what put them there.
But I was going to say that they had those failures before that. They definitely, if people don't pause to think about that. Like that does not happen without the failures that preceded. I don't care who it is.
Yeah. So I guess then, how do we change the narrative, to actually pay attention to the part that we're missing?
Well, I mean,
as opposed to what we just see.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things is to do that very thing, which is why I wrote the book in a way, is just to have people say out loud and to celebrate and share, what they suck at. And so my great desire was to create a community of people who celebrated and shared these things. And in fact, that's what a lot of the conversations that I have with people because of this book once you open it up, it's amazing. I've done it in groups and I've done it individually. And when people start talking about the things that they suck out, there is so much laughter and there's so much joy, and you can see the relief. And you go, that's one of the steps, is to celebrate that as well. And I think that, this celebrating only the successes is just, I don't know. And maybe there's something innate in me. It's like, I always, like when I go in for a review with my, I have a boss and I go in for a review and he'll start telling me what I do well. And I'm like, you know what? I know what I do well. I don't really want to hear that. Just tell me what you think that I'm not doing. Like, tell me what I'm sucking at. I can take it. But I also, that's helpful to me. I know what I'm doing well. I don't need to see that. Not to say that you don't celebrate.
Right.
Things. I'm not a big, hey, I did my job. I need a gold star. No, I did my job. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. Like there's a sense of responsibility there. But, the way in which if I am, if something I'm doing, either something I could be doing better, that's what I want to hear about. Yeah. And I feel like that partly comes from this discipline of really being okay, sucking at something and not feeling entitled. Again, it's that thing, what I think, whatever you read in the beginning, where I say, when we do succeed, it should be, it should be humbling, and it's just, we've lost a lot of humility. And frankly, I think that, in the loss of humility is on the other side of that is a fear of humiliation, right? Which comes from the same word. So that's what's interesting. It's almost the same word, but they're very different. Humility is very powerful, and humiliation is one of the most terrifying experiences, feelings that humans can have, right? It terrifies us. So I think it comes from that place of the fear of being humiliated. But in that, we overcompensate by being fearful and then not trying new things and not allowing ourselves to experience things. And so where does humility fit in any of that? There's no room for it. And I think that if this discipline of being okay with failing, and it's not a call for failure though. That's the other thing. Yeah. It's not a call for failure at all. Like, striving for excellence. I mean, I strive for excellence every time I surf. I mean, I want to surf. I want to surf well. I want to surf better. Yeah. Not that I want to suck at it. I mean, I had a day in January when I paddled out and I didn't catch one wave. And I came out of the water after 2 hours and I turned to my son and I just said, I fucking hate surfing. I just hate surfing.
I've had those days.
Yeah. And I just thought, and I was like, why do I do this? And I had to go through the whole, it was very funny though. And I had to even be able to let myself express that. Like I had to let myself go there and hate it and express that hate for it in a way so that I could just get to the next day where I would paddle out again. And, and I had a better session the next day. But, you have to be, honest about that. And also, when I do catch waves and I ride them, I feel like it's a great privilege in a way. And I feel very humbled by it. I do. Even though I'm the one catching them and riding them, I still feel very humbled by the whole act. And it's an amazing feeling. It's a feeling of gratitude as opposed to I'm entitled to catch that wave. No, I'm not. It's hard and I'm not entitled to it. You know what I mean? But I am grateful for every single one that I catch and ride. And then when I catch and ride them well, yeah, okay. My ego gets tapped. I'll admit it.
I've been there.
That'll carry me for a while to the next. But you know what? If I didn't push and suck at it for so many years, I never would have known what that feeling was. And that feeling is I think it's the best feeling in the world. But
yeah,
I'm sure snowboarding is similar. And,
yeah, absolutely.
With free skates and as well. And,
I think that there's one thing that you said, towards the end of the book, which I think is a really beautiful place to bring us full circle. You said, if we can find beauty and meaning in our efforts, then we open our hearts to so much of what life offers. And while hearts will sometimes break, the lacquer that heals them is the joy an open heart summons. And I think that struck me in particular because I wanted to ask you about recovery from failure. Because, you said our heart will sometimes break, but the lacquer that heals them is the joy an open heart summons. And I think in so many cases, that doesn't happen for people after a failure, that they make a permanent decision based on a temporary circumstance.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then they'll never allow themselves, kind of give themselves give themselves the opportunity for that healing to occur, right? If you shut down as soon as something breaks down or fails or something, you don't allow for what's waiting on the other side of it. So yeah, and then I think in part of that chapter, what I talk about is talking to. I think it's when I talked to Elizabeth Lesser, who's the founder of Omega Institute, and she basically says that if you're going to have an open heart, right, and you're going to feel joy, that open heart is also going to lead you to pain. You can't only open it to one channel. You can't do that. It's not the way it works, right? So that's the idea. It's like you have to be open to success or joy, right? You have to be open to failure and frustration. And you don't get to have just one pathway to reward success, ability and all that. You have to be open to the other thing and understand that they're all valuable, that there's not one is not, don't have a value proposition that it's like, well, when I'm having a good time, or when I'm catching a wave, that's when surfing is good. And when I paddle out and I sit there and you get snaked or I kook out on every single wave, it's not a good experience, as opposed to, well, wait, when I paddle out, I'm in the water, I'm in nature, I'm having an experience, and that experience, should not rely on whether or not I ride a wave well. And mostly that's the way I kind of experience it. But every once in a while, I forget my own teaching, and then I'll go out there and I'll get really frustrated. And that feels bad. And that just feels bad, as opposed to getting out of the water and go, oh man, I just got, and I've had sessions where I've just gotten hammered. You just get hammered, you get hammered, you get hammered. And I have had people watch me and say, why do you do it? And I'm like, because actually that part is just as much fun too, in the wave, under the wave, whatever you're doing. And again, that metaphor, kind of goes forward to basically any effort that you're making. And I always think that there's a great, it's a great metaphor for writing. Because you're right, most writing is just crap. We write crap, we write it again, we write it again. It's like the stuff that you keep and then actually put in the world is, one tiny fraction of the work that you've done. I can't tell you, I've got so many books sitting in my file books that I've started. I've got 5 books that I've started that I'm going they're just not, they're just not good. They're not there. I'm not there, whatever it is. And that's okay too. I don't ever think about that, you don't think about that of saying that's a waste of time, because that's all process and it's necessary to get to the good stuff.
Yeah. I always say you have to shovel a mountain of shit to get an ounce of gold.
Yeah, totally. And but that's true. I mean, I do think that surfing really applies to that, because most of the time, what is it? You never see, I have the percentage in the book and I forget what it is offhand, but even for professional surfers, the percentage of time that they're actually surfing as opposed to doing everything else that you do is, I don't think there's another sport in the world where that's true. You know what I mean? It's there's a lot of time spent doing something else besides being on that wave, and for me, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of that. So if you're not loving the process, forget it. And the same thing with writing. I think if you don't love the process, you shouldn't be doing it. If you're just writing, it's like writing to get published, forget it. That's just you want people to read your work for sure, but you can't start there.
Wow. Well, I think that makes a really beautiful place to finish our conversation. So I have one final question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Unmistakable. It's funny because when you look at that word, right, what does it mean, unmistakable? You mean undeniable, clear? I think every single one of us is a creative. I think I would say that every one of us is an unmistakable creative, because the creative process is all iterative, right? So you're just iterating and iterating and iterating. And however, if you're iterating, right, as long as you keep doing it, I mean, I think if you're iterating, then you're creating. And whether it's good or not, or of value, again, almost doesn't matter unless you try to sell it, or, you're looking for validation or something like that. So I think all of us have that quality, and you just wish everybody would tap into whatever their particular thing is, and they shouldn't look at somebody else's creative kind of process and say, I should be doing that. I should be getting up in the morning and writing from 4 to, in the morning, because that's how my friend does it. I don't do that. You're just going to, or I should surf like this other person, or I should draw better lines, or, on a wave, or, so I think that everyone in a way is, and I think the unmistakable part of that is that to create, you can't, making mistakes is what iterating is, right? That's what it is. And then every once in a while we stumble into something. It's like, I'll stumble into catching and maneuvering on that wave really well. And I go, wow, but most of it is just a try and another try and another try. And then you try and you fall off, or you pop up and then you wipe out, or, somebody's in your way. And I think that's all part of the creative process, though. I don't know if I'm answering that correctly.
No, there's no correct answer to this.
Correct. No, exactly. No, that was a slip, and probably an important one if I was going to psychoanalyze it. But
incredible. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your insights and wisdom with our listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, and everything else that you're up to?
The best place to go is I have 2 websites, but the krinaldi.com is probably where you find most stuff, and it'll lead you to the Suck It Something website as well. But Rinaldi, it's where all my essays are, and it's just updated with all my information. So yeah, that's probably the best place. And then on Instagram, I am Rinaldi Wave, or Suck It Something. So I have 2 Instagram accounts, but the one that I populate more is Rinaldi Wave.
Cool. Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Hey, did you know that every Sunday our community manager, Milena, sends out 10 key takeaways from episodes just like this one? All you have to do to receive it is sign up for our newsletter. Just visit unmistakablecreative.com/newsletter and you'll get them delivered right to your inbox. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/newsletter.
I was wearing the wrong foundation shade for years, and no one told me. Thanks, guys. Then I discovered Il Makiage, the bold new beauty brand using AI to shade match. Their best-selling Woke Up Like This foundation has 50,000 5-star reviews and is a total game changer for my glow-up. Plus, it's cruelty-free. You can even try before you buy at home for 14 days, risk-free. Take the quiz and get your shade of flawless at ilmakiage.com/quiz. That's ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.